All right, Zeke, this is day 2 of our week of looking back. And this was a very, very, very special episode for us because on March 6th, 2018, we had the late, the great Al Young on the show. And I remember this was like the moment that we felt like we kind of made it to be able to have someone like Al Young. I mean, at that point, I think we had 250 people listening a week, and we had just gone from having Instagram videos that had thousands of people watching, and we moved over to podcasts and 250 people were listening, and we're like, I don't know if we should keep doing this. And then we get Al Young, and we're like, I can't believe he wants to talk to us.
I think it was more we wanted to talk to him, and he was willing to talk to us.
That is more accurate than what I had. I think it was much more accurate. I remember I had reached out and I was talking to the PR person for Four Roses, and I said, well, you know, we'd much rather do it in person. And she's like, well, Al will do it over the phone. And we're like, yeah, we'll do it over the phone. It's okay.
No, I mean, and even before we mentioned the recording, I would say to anyone out there that's, you know, a Four Roses fan, whatnot, or just general bourbon enthusiast, look up the book that Al, you know, spent years assimilating and writing about the history of Four Roses. It's a wonderful read. They were nice enough to send us a copy, and sitting down and thumbing the pages and seeing the history of the brand, the highs and the lows. As, you know, whiskey went over the years. He really did a wonderful job, I thought, putting together all the bits and pieces of how the brand was started. Again, its ups and downs and how it got to where it is now. And I can't imagine anyone that's a bourbon enthusiast would not enjoy reading that book.
Yeah, things that I took away from this whole episode was he gave away the special recipe for water. He agreed with Zeke on the origin of Four Roses because there's a couple different theories out there, and he agreed with you, which was the start of a lot of people agreeing with Zeke and nobody agreeing with me. And
the theory, I read it from the book. I didn't postulate this on my own.
I know, but there were a couple different theories out there, and he said, well, which one do you think is right? And you said one, and he said, yeah, I think you're right.
Well, it made good sense.
The third thing is that, you know, he had some really interesting stories that we didn't always hear about the origin of everything with Jim Rutledge, and some stuff that I had no idea of until we sat down and actually talked to him about that time from Seagram's going over to what is Four Roses now.
I mean, they were damn near belly up, and it was a struggle to keep the brand alive. But, you know, there was people that fought for it and believed in it, that had been there forever, like Jim, like Al, like Dan Gardner. I mean, back to the backbone. There's just a ton of heart that's always supported Four Roses, and that's what makes it the brand it is.
Totally agree with you, and I was very, very appreciative to sit down with Al, and I wish we could do it again. Just a side note for everybody, Zeke meant that he assembled the book, not assimilated the book.
You know, sometimes me and words don't work out too well.
Anyways, today's show is sponsored by CaskCartel.com, changing the industry standard as to how you get your alcohol. You know, they are like the Amazon of the spirits industry. They hook you up with merchants that will send whiskey directly to your door. And if you're like Zeke, you're super lazy, you don't want to get up off the couch, you're going to go to CaskCartel.com. You're going to find something you like, whiskey, gin, bourbon, scotch, rye, whatever it is, get it shipped directly to your door. Obviously, an online retailer is going to cost a little bit more for some allocated items, but your daily drinkers, you can get them shipped pretty reasonably directly to your door. And hell, if you're sick of looking for Pappy and you just want to find a place to buy it and you don't mind paying a little bit more, go to CaskCartel.com and buy your Pappy there. I mean, if you have the money, you know where it is. Also, find them on Instagram at Cask Cartel. They're always doing awesome giveaways to the people that follow them. Today's show is also sponsored by PremiumBarProducts.com, the one place you can go to get the official Dad's Drinking Bourbon Glencairn. You can also get personalized laser-etched glassware, whether or not you want to say bring back the stash, get it on a glass, you can do that. You can get the dram, the wee dram, you can get the Glencairn, you can get the perfect dram, the distiller's tasting glass, you can get the Tua, the neat, whatever it is, they have it. You can laser etch it. They also have bar tools. Go to premiumbarproducts.com. And if you are a distillery or a bourbon group and you have a bigger wholesale order, reach out to me. I will get you in touch with them so you can get wholesale pricing on a bigger order. Zeke, without further ado, the Godfather himself, Al Young, let's let everybody listen to this in one of our first times actually fumbling through on a phone call. I think we had it on speakerphone. We were holding up to it, and we knew that if we pushed any button, something would go terribly wrong in this recording.
No, I mean, Al was great. I remember seeing him at a pick after this interview and like, hey, you remember talking? He's like, oh, yeah, I know. Where's your buddy, the big guy? I'm like, I keep trying to bring him. He hasn't made it yet.
Without further ado, here's Al Young. Cheers. Hello, everyone. My name is John Edwards. With me, as always, is Zeke Baker. Say hello to the folks, Zeke.
Hello. Hope everyone's having a wonderful evening and enjoying a tasty something in front of them.
Wherever you are, whatever time of day it is, thanks for making us a part of your day. And this one is a good one, Zeke. We have someone very, very special on the phone that we are looking forward to talking to.
John and I are admittedly very big fans of Four Roses. We really love some of those single barrel expressions. And over the past 30 or so minutes leading up to this, we've even become pretty big fans of this yellow label expression they sent us. It's a sleeper, folks.
Often overlooked. Don't sleep on that yellow label. You're going to look at it. You're going to see that it is 80 proof. You might look over it for one of the private picks or store picks. But that as a daily, that might be my daily drinker of 2018. I know Early Times was your daily drinker of 2017. But the price of that, I know it's 80 proof, but there is so much flavor from that yellow label Four Roses.
I couldn't agree more, and I think a lot of that's the fact that the proofs don't climb much on Four Roses. A lot of those single barrel expressions are still under 120, so cutting it down to 80, it's a cut, but it's not weak sauce or juice by any means.
No, it's got a bunch of flavor. It's got good nose. It's really enjoyable, but my phone's ringing right now, so let's go to the phone. Zeke, we have someone very special on the phone right now. A lot of people would say that a certain person embodies the brand as a brand ambassador. This guy actually wrote the book on the brand, and that is the one, the only, Mr. Al Young. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure, sirs.
It is definitely not every day that we get to talk to somebody like you, and we will take this opportunity for everything it's worth, so I hope you're ready.
I'll try to keep up.
On this one, I think we kind of talked to you beforehand. Everybody kind of knows the history. Jim Rutledge gives you your first tour at Four Roses at June 5th, 1967. You started off with an entry-level quality lab job. You worked and moved up until 1983 when the distillery closed. Then you transferred to Seagram's in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. Then came back in 1990 to Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. Reunited with Jim Rutledge. You guys bring it back to prominence, getting rid of some of the blended stuff, really focusing on the straight bourbon, and now you're winning awards and putting out your own bourbon. Is that a good summation of all the history?
Wow, I didn't know we did all that.
You guys did a lot. And I think
it is.
And I think the reason we put it that way is because we could sit here and have a big conversation with you on all the history and everything that happened with Four Roses. But Zeke and I are whiskey dorks. So now that we got that out of the way, just to touch on the history here for a second, what do you think the thing was that changed it the most at Four Roses? Was it you and Jim getting back together? What was the secret sauce? What was the magic that brought it back?
I would like to say that that's the way it happened. But actually, it was a lot of grit and determination by a lot of people to make the brand survive and make the distillery work, because we were on the ropes. And it was a question of do or die, because Seagram's really didn't know how to manage bourbon. And they were in the process of going out, and we wanted to keep the thing going. Jim wanted to ask us all to put in our retirement money to keep it going. And we just didn't have enough to do that. So it was by cheek and by jowl there for a while before we teamed up with the Kirin Brewery from Japan to make this thing work. So it was there's a lot of synergy involved there. A lot of good whiskey being made by a lot of good folks, and just watching for a place to let it go.
And even when you think about that, you know, when Seagram did turn it over to Vivendi, it was almost like a time of turmoil. It was Seagram to Vivendi to Diageo to Kirin. It was kind of pinballing back and forth. That had to be tough too, right?
It was, from the standpoint that we didn't know if we had jobs. And we were all at a critical point in our life. We had kids in college. We had kids in elementary school. Some of the workers were really worried about their future, because they had been through those tough times when the distillery didn't run for a year or two, many years before, and they still stuck with it to make it work. And you know, when your means of income is on the line, it makes you want to be more determined to make it work even better.
Very impressive, to say the least, and definitely, I'm not sure about John, but at least on my own end, looking back through just brief history things and trying to become more educated, I hear everyone say, there was this, dark time for Four Roses, which honestly I wasn't aware of before the book. And then even probably more laughable for me, my parents are here this weekend, and, explained to my dad, we were interviewing Al Young, the brand ambassador for Four Roses. And he's like, Four Roses? Is that even worth anything still? So, I laughed pretty hard. I'm like, yeah, Dad, it's like anything else. There's some ups and downs, but obviously it's definitely a big uptick now, but it is interesting to see, how people, perceive or think of things over time, and where we're not.
Well, probably not only did we have the problem of making sure that we had an owner or that we survived, but we had a lot to overcome, because we were fighting the blended whiskey image while we were trying to rebuild a base for straight Kentucky bourbon, which is what we do now, without any regard for blended whiskey rather, that uses neutral grain alcohol. It was an uphill struggle for a while, and we're still, I guess, apprehensive from time to time to ensure that the brand stays on the right course.
I don't know what's more impressive, the fact that you guys brought the brand back to life, or the fact that you got Zeke to read a book.
Well, it kind of goes hand in hand, a little bit of both. It's sort of like the little engine that could, the old-fashioned story.
Well, see, I can read that book well.
It goes really
anything
quick,
that's a 4-word sentence. That's what I'm good at, especially from
I think I could. I think I can.
Yeah.
I think I can.
From 7:40 at night to 8:30 at night, I can do those 4-word sentences amazingly.
I hear you.
We're used to reading Llama Llama Red Pajama, and I know that's probably too recent of a reference, but that's what the kids keep making me read right now. Well, you probably read that to grandkids at this point.
Probably so.
But to your statement of uncertainty at times, I guess knock on wood, wouldn't want to jinx anyone, but at least I'll actually speak for John and I both on this one and say we both feel more than comfortable stating that Four Roses is in an amazing place right now, and he and I both, some of the best bottles we've had have been some of those single barrel expressions, the private picks and whatnot, and I can't think of anything that's a better product or a go-to. I constantly recommend it to people, honestly, as far as what can I get that's cask strength, going to be an amazing flavor and something very novel, and that I can probably find. These days, that's the most important thing. Somebody asks you, and I just tell them, find you a nice Four Roses pick.
A lot of that has to do with the dedication to quality, and it has to be quality whiskey, or you can't do anything with it.
That is absolutely a good point. And I think it's a good segue to go to your quality whiskey. I don't know if you know this, but we did name the Al Young 50th anniversary bottle. That was our whiskey of the year in 2017. I can't tell you enough how amazing of a whiskey this was, how much it changed, how much if you let it sit there for 10 minutes and took a sip, it's different than you sit there for 10 minutes again and I got something different. Constantly changing and evolving and in good ways. I've never once had a sip of it and been disappointed, and I've always had something else to talk to Zeke about with it, and for that, we just have to take our hats off to you.
Well, thank you very much for that. I'm glad that you chose it as your whiskey of the year for 2017. I must tell you that I was amazed that we could hit the mark so closely for what I wanted to do with the whiskey to begin with. Brent came to me a year ahead of time and said, we're going to put a whiskey out in your honor. And after he said that, I sort of had to run around the room a couple of times to get it into my head that they weren't kidding about it. And then he said, what would you like to have in it? And I told him I'd like to have something that was a little bit Southern in concept. And the notes on the back of the bottle, which we probably talked about before, or you've talked about before, had a little bit of a Southern overtone with vanilla bean and magnolia blossoms and ripe cherry and rich oak flavors. Stuff like that I would like for them to bounce out. So we went together getting some samples of whiskeys and putting them together. And then I had to do some traveling. And one day Brent called and he said, why don't you come on down and take a look? See what we've got going together here for you. So I went down and looked at the samples and went through about 2 or 3 of them. And I thought, these are really good. And then that fourth one, the fifth one, just really stood out, just popped in my mind. And I said, I really like this. This is really good. And I don't know how much you know about Brent Elliott or if you've met him, but Brent's not the kind of guy to agree with you just to agree with you. But over my shoulder, I heard him say, that's the one I like too. So I knew we were on the right track. Okay. I knew we were headed the right way. And then he said, but I'll tell you what I'd like for you to do. Come back in a day or two. I want to kind of tinker with the percentages a little bit, kind of see what we can do here. And when we did, I came back and we took a look at it again. I rolled right up to the sample I liked the first time. And then I thought, maybe we need to go a couple more. And I did. And when I did, I said, this one really bounces out. This is good. This has what I'm looking for. And Brent, over the shoulder again, said, I like that one too. And I figure anytime you can agree with your master distiller, you're doing pretty decent.
Well, and you're teeing it up perfectly here for me because I got a couple questions. I mean, you have 12-year OBSF, that's 20% in there. The 15-year OBSK, that's 25%. The 23-year OBSV, that's 5%. And there's a 13-year OESV, and that makes up the bulk at 50%. Those percentages, is that something that Brent kind of put together based on the notes you gave him and then you went and tasted those? Or did you have recipes that you liked after being there for so long that you said, I absolutely want these 4 in there?
Well, I did like the K recipe. It's always been a favorite for a long time. And the V is what's made the farm. We've made a lot of V in the distillery when I was distillery manager. And, and I'm dancing around the bush a little bit because just as soon as you declare the ones that you're a favorite, everybody jumps on it. And it's not really true because some of the spearmint qualities out of that OBSF just lit up the room when you get it in that final finish. When you taste the whiskey and you get a little bit of a minty character near the end. So, just to specify those 4 coats to begin with, not necessarily. The only thing that I would like to have had and did get was to have whiskey that was made when I was the distillery manager at Four Roses. And that hit the ballpark right there.
And that's why there's the 23 in there, right? The 23 year?
Right.
Interesting.
And even so far
nice.
as the 15 and at the time the 12, that was about right.
That is crazy. I can't think of one bottle to honor somebody better than everything you kind of just described there.
Well, the whiskey is the reason, but they went a step further and made a container that looks like a bottle that was being used when I first came to work in the industry. So it's a bottle design that Seagram's was using from 1965 to 1969. And it's got that really beautiful cartouche in the center with the round circle with the roses in the middle that you will find on some of those bottles from that time period. It's over the moon. I thought it was cool.
Yeah, and I don't want to keep jumping in because Zeke's looking at me. I know he has a question, but that is the best looking bottle I have on my shelf. And I just love it. I'm not just saying this because you're on the phone. We've talked about this before. I've said it's one of those things where you're just so happy the whiskey is good because it just looks so good in the bottle too.
Well, you know, when I first got a bottle of it and brought it home, I mean, I just couldn't believe it was actually happening. I sat on the dining room table and walked around that table for about 20 minutes, just looking at it. Seriously, I was looking at it and judging it and trying to figure out how you could get so much flavor into a whiskey that was only about 107.6 proof or something like that.
Yes, sir. I think Fred Minnick's review sums it up best, right? He listed everything that you could possibly taste, and that was his review of it.
Yeah, he did an excellent job of it.
Yeah.
It was a paragraph in one sentence, I'm pretty sure. And to John's note, and to yours as well, I had a similar experience. Lucky enough to get it from the Cox Creek distillery the day it was released. Sorry I didn't make it all the way up to the distillery where you are, but coming from Nashville, logistics were just easier, obviously.
Sure.
But had a similar experience. Finally got home and sat out on the deck and said, all right, let's see what this thing is that I've got up before the sun. Had an early morning, long day, and let's see if it was worth it, so to speak. And literally just had it in the glass and looked at it and nosed it for forever and enjoyed it. And then finally started diving in and literally over probably another 45 minutes, just letting the flavors develop and experience.
That's one of the hallmarks of what I look for in whiskeys is it's okay. I mean, if you have some hype about a whiskey or you have some knowledge of a whiskey, that's one thing. But when you drink it, you don't want the words to come out of your mouth. Good golly, why did I get that to begin with?
We've all been there.
Is this all there is? Is this what it is? Oh gosh. I wanted to make something, and I think we do that with everything we turn out. But I wanted to make a whiskey that you wanted to drink not only once, but you want to drink it again.
Oh, I would say I would add about 4 agains to that, and say literally it's a cornucopia of flavor. John and I are by no means the most experienced or educated tasters or palate or however you want to look at it. For 2 guys,
we give relatable reviews.
I thoroughly enjoy it, and not to knock anyone or be negative, but at least in my own opinion, I think anyone that just doesn't relish in every aspect of it, it's just too many flavors, which is not a bad thing at all. I think people have their textbook complexities of this is where the nose should be, this is where the palate should be, and this is where the finish should be. And if it broadens those parameters, it's somewhat problematic mentally. But I get different taste, not even each pour, but each sip. I just truly enjoy it.
Well, it certainly wakes up your senses, that's for sure. And you're not getting a burst of super high proof alcohol that deadens your senses. You're getting a nice surround mouthfeel to it. It's hitting all the flavor receptors, and more importantly, when it comes down the gullet, you're getting a really nice finish with very little burn.
And I think that's one of the things, too. It hits the sweet spot. It's almost like the Goldilocks. It's not 130 proof that it's going to kill you. It's not 80 proof that's making you want more. It's just that right in the middle that's opening everything up. I think for me, it just coats your mouth. I mean, we're sipping on it right now in full disclosure. And unfortunately, we're looking at our bottles and we're realizing we're almost out. And this is becoming increasingly harder and harder to find. What do you
I hate to break this to you, but and you probably think I'm lying. I wish I had it on the Skype, but I'm sitting here looking at my bottle of Four Roses Small Batch 50th anniversary, and it's getting below the top label. And I'm saying, oh no.
I think you have better contacts than we do to get another bottle.
We're almost we're under the 50.
Yeah, we are right. We're halfway through the 50th right now. That's where.
And by we, John means Zeke's bottle.
Yeah. But It also begs the question. So we talk about all those things and everything being unlocked in the nose, and I do have to say it's not an astringent nose. I mean, you are getting a warm, open flavor right on the nose. You're getting your tongue and mouth is just coated in caramel and all sorts of other goodness, and the finish doesn't really give you a terrible Kentucky hug. It's just nice and warm and inviting. So when you had these from Brent Elliott and he sits you down and he says, these are my different blends that I've put together, what are you looking for in the taste and the mouthfeel and the palate and the finish? What's the number one thing you gravitate to? Is it the nose? Is it the mouthfeel? Is it the finish? What really excites you about those?
I'll tell you what I'm primarily looking for. I'm looking for an alcohol that does not bite. The last thing I want to have is something that just takes the roof of your mouth off or your tongue. I don't want a bite that disturbs the total ambiance of the liquid. I want something that settles in nicely. Maybe have a little heat at the beginning on the front of the tongue. But then when it settles in, it just demands that you expect flavors that you are enjoying and that you really get out of it.
I should warn you, we're under the 50th now. we had to pour second glasses.
Oh my goodness.
So regarding blending, at least, and it's something John and I talk about offline and tinkering around with things when we're bored. How do you really approach that? And what profiles do you really try and seek out? Or is it just, totally, novel each time? Like, all right, I'm going to try to assemble this or that. And then how long does it sit or anything you would do to it before tasting once you've assembled something like that?
Well, it takes several weeks for sure, from concept to finalizing samples just to take a look at them and evaluate. So it takes a while. You've got to let the whiskey breathe. Of course, you realize we have an understanding of what all of these different codes are capable of doing. And then when you say that, you turn around and look at the tier that the barrel came out of, the warehouse it came out of, although there's no sweet spot really for Four Roses barrels. You take into consideration some of the winners in the past, and you kind of gravitate toward that. And then you experiment. You've got your profile you're looking for. Southern. What do we need there? We need a little spice. We need a little fruit. We need a little bit of herbal complex to it. And we need maybe a little bit of the rye character. And then you start reaching into your quiver, if you will, and start bringing things out to mix together.
You touch on a bunch of different things. And you are a seasoned veteran. But let's go to the first thing. I think we can all agree that Al Young's 50th anniversary release was amazing. Thank you very, very much for putting it out. To close out this section, I would just say, are we going to get another one?
I can't say that. I'm not going to be here for the second 50th.
Can we get a 51st anniversary?
You never know. But I don't think we're going to be doing 100. But you can expect some interesting things to come about. After all, Four Roses is celebrating its 130th anniversary for the brand this year in 2018. So in keeping with what we've done in the past, I wouldn't doubt that there's a limited edition small batch in the works.
Can we be assured that you're going to have your hand in it at some point, or are you going to trust that all to Brent?
I think that we'll have a hand in it, if nothing more than just taste the samples. But Brent and I have talked about it briefly, and in some shape or form, lengthy conversations. We've got some interesting ideas coming out that will be different than the 50th. That's our objective, is to be different than the 50th. But I think you're going to like what you get.
Well, with 10 mashes, I think that certainly affords you that opportunity. And, if somebody's hand isn't present on a certain day, if you let us know, 12 hours in advance or so, we could probably find a sick day at work or some PTO for some other reason and make a trip up.
Yeah, you have our number now.
We might have to do the secret handshake, you know.
But moving into the other part of the interview, and if you are listening, we are talking to Al Young. You should know that. You selected the episode with his name on it. But we are a Whiskey Dork show, as you all know, and Mr. Young was starting to get into all the sorts of things that all of you, or all of us, talk about all the time. Now, you talk about the warehouses, and you say there's not a sweet spot. There was a big rush last year for Warehouse ME, because that came out and everybody was saying that ME was getting all the good stuff. What's your take on the single-story warehouse versus multi-story warehouses? Do you think that makes a difference? And what is it, when people say a warehouse is having a particularly good batch, is that just the run of juice that came, or is that something like weather, all sorts of variables, things like in the wood? What do you think causes that mass hysteria to happen? I know that was a loaded question because it's a bunch of questions all in one.
The answer is yes. I know that what you were talking about someone declaring that ME was the warehouse of the day, and it got to be so hectic, especially in private barrel selections, that we were almost threatening to go out and write an M on every warehouse. But for the private barrel selections, but the fact of the matter is, the single-story warehouses give us more even aging, with only 6 levels high in each rick. It gives the air a chance to circulate. It brings about a combination that you can't get in multi-storied warehouses. Now, I've worked in multi-storied warehouses in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, and they're the deuce in the summer. They're hot and all get out on the upper floors, cold in winter, and they are something in their own right that a lot of people cherish. And back in the day when people were rotating barrels, it was kind of the tour de force. But these single-story warehouses have so much more to offer, we think, for our bourbons. It doesn't really matter whether it's warehouse C or warehouse M. You're going to find a diversity in all the barrels.
And to that note, I will say one of our local friends here in Nashville, Lauren Simpson, I'm sure you're familiar with. His assertion is that the warehouse doesn't matter. It's simply the distillate or the run, and I assume the yeast as well for, what came off the line that day. Would you, align with that statement?
Yeah.
He did say the answer to everything was yes.
Well, you can almost guarantee that you're going to be able to taste the distillate and know. I mean, you will know if it's a high rye or if it's a high corn, and in most cases you'll be able to kind of get an idea whether it's spicy or something like that. But it's not until it really gets aged out, and Lauren's got a good palate on it. But you don't know until you've had a chance to age it out. And even if you're using the same mash bill, whether it's the high rye or the high corn, and you're using the same yeast, the position in that warehouse could alter it to the point where you think you've got say an OBSV, and it turns out to be an OBSQ. Because you're so dead set in your mind that you know what you're looking for, and you know what you're looking for from a certain mash bill and yeast type, and the wood will change it for you. The warehouse itself will do some changes on it. The length of time that it's aged. There are just so many variables that it's more of a Duke's mixture every time you go into a barrel selection.
No, I laugh at that notion, honestly, because, we have plenty of friends that will ask, all right, so you're talking about Four Roses single barrel. All right, well, which one or two, mashes do you really like? And I just laugh and say, hadn't had a bad one yet. If you want to send me you want to send me one you're not sure of, I'll be more than happy to give you my thoughts. But I don't limit myself by any means. I enjoy them all, and am thankful for every one I get to taste.
Well, we've had people that have come to barrel selections that actually never want a certain yeast code in the setup for the number of barrels that we have for them to sample. And I remember one time when there was a case where somebody said they didn't like a declared recipe, and that we had it out there, not because we wanted to be nasty or anything, but just because that's what we had to offer. And they couldn't stand this particular code And after all of the selection was done, they picked it.
Inevitably, that was bound to happen.
and you just have to say, well, how about that?
Yeah, always have an open mind. And I will say I did see at the beginning of the book that you were somewhat of a history buff. So at least if nothing else to prove I read this thing, I did see a note saying that.
Is this your book report right now?
Hey, I'm just proving I read the thing.
Okay.
If we're speaking to a history buff, I don't want to think we're BSing here.
Well, I used to take offense when people said, you're a history buff. I mean, that sounds like, well, you dabble in it from day to day, and maybe you don't dabble in it for a year and you come back to it or whatever there is to it. But, if you're lucky enough to be in the industry as long as I have, not only are you historical because you're old, but things just kind of cling to you. You meet the people, you know what's going on in the industry, you have some idea when the product changes, some of the advertising techniques and everything. And if that's what it takes to be a history buff, I'm all for it.
I just think that means that you care, and that's just genuine, and you can't replace or beat that as opposed to any other emotion about a hobby.
And one other thing that I have to ask you before Zeke gets back into, we're looking at each other just so you know, and we know you're a seasoned professional because every time you say something, we're like, okay, I have a follow-up, and Zeke's like, I have 4 follow-ups, and I'm like, I have 5. But there's not that many places to go for history anymore, besides a good book. And I think that's something to be said about your book. You really put some time in there, and it really outlines the brand, and just we're very appreciative of that.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Zeke, continue your book report. I interrupted you.
So to the original point, I was just going to toss out that, per the book, it does say with the single level story high Ricks, there should only be, roughly an 8-degree temperature variance, as opposed to most people that have the multiple stories up to 35-degree variance, which obviously can, alter what's going in and out of the barrel and how much of a, flavor influx there could be.
Yeah, you do have quite a bit of loss. It's an overused term, but the angel share, the amount of evaporation, the things that can, occur in the liquid, take a terrible beating the more heat you apply to it. You can't age whiskey any faster by artificially heating it or cooling it, and we don't do that. We rely on the ambient temperature outside to do the work for us. We'll open a window every once in a while and let some air in, especially in the summer when it's really warm, so that the fumes don't asphyxiate anybody sitting in the warehouse working. But outside of that, we just let nature take care of it.
So to that note, I guess especially in today's market, consumer-wise, there's a strong group that are very pro-age statement and a group that are very, very anti. I guess I would wonder where you fall on that notion. Obviously, as you said, the 23 that's in the blend has multiple meanings in reference to you. But do you really look at an age statement as a judging factor, or where do you go for when you look and determine how good a barrel is?
For a long time, and rightly so, we've always maintained that we think our whiskey does its best between 6 and 8 years old. But there are some rare instances out there where you've got some barrels that are coming along that get a little bit older and are deserving to put into these limited editions. But, the 80 proof Four Roses straight bourbon that we make is probably the most undervalued whiskey on the market today because sometimes it has really old whiskeys in it.
Well, it's funny you say that because, not to interrupt you again, I've said that a couple times, but Zeke and I were sitting here. You guys were nice enough to send us over a small batch, a single barrel, and the yellow label. And that yellow label, we've been sitting through it, and we're about halfway through that bottle. It is really smooth, and it is really good. That should not be overlooked.
No, I don't think it should. I think you're on the right track with that one. Small batch has its place. It's good whiskey. Makes a great Manhattan. Single barrel by itself, up neat, or over a cube or so, it can hold its own with anybody else's single barrel. There's no question about that, if not surpassing it.
I wouldn't disagree on any of those statements.
But this Four Roses 80 proof, oh my goodness, it's out of sight. That's the one that, if there's an expression to use like made the farm or paid the rent, this is the one that's been around for quite a while, and it does the work.
I could certainly see that, and I guess in my head I'm kind of thinking that, especially with the majority of the single barrels I've seen being somewhat lower proofs compared to competitors, I think that the 80 proof may get overlooked as being overly diluted, but there is a ton of flavor in that thing.
There certainly is. There really is.
I've been blown away for the past hour and a half.
And it's one of those things, I think we are admittedly kind of Four Roses dorks, but I think you get caught up sometimes in the single barrel hype and the recipes and the limited edition small batches, that it's good for us to have periods like this where we sit back and just say, like, you know, those other ones are really good when you're really just sitting and enjoying a pour, but daily drinker status, things like that, that yellow label, you can't beat the price, nor can you beat the taste.
Well, that's good to hear. We sort of think so.
Yeah.
So a random question pertaining to the yellow label, since we're on that one, and I guess a difference I caught up in the book again. The back of the yellow label has one story as to how the Four Roses name or label came to be, but the book alludes to a different one, and instead of mentioning Paul Jr., it speaks to Lawrence Lavelle Jones. Which of those two stories do you buy?
Well, I think that Lawrence Lavelle Jones's story kind of was a takeoff from Paul Jones's early attempt to woo a Southern belle. And, so consequently, I think he just borrowed the idea from his uncle Paul. But that in itself is a love story that is just unbelievable. I mean, that anybody could stay so devoted to a woman that he would go over to her house and woo her and entice her enough to wear a corsage of 4 red roses and say yes was, it speaks well of the man. I mean, this was a guy that was dead level best, a hard-nosed businessman who turned out being the champion of 4 Roses up until the day he died in 1941. He was a force to be reckoned with. Well, his love for this woman just about took him out when she died.
At least for the Lawrence Lavelle side, supposedly the madam was from Columbus, Georgia, and being from Georgia, and my mother's side of the family being from down near that area, I can't say it's not believable. I think of my grandmother, and she tells me about being courted by my grandfather, and I laugh heavily.
Well, I've talked to a lot of Jones family members, and some of them older and some of them middle-aged, and they all swear that it's true, and they swear that he was the man that they say he was, that he was just dedicated to her, dedicated to making the business grow, and did a good job on both.
Well, women make men do crazy things. I don't know if you've seen the Taj Mahal, but that was all. and that castle in Versailles, that was also the Kentucky's version of the Taj Mahal. And women drive men to greatness, right?
Well, my house in Lexington's living testimony to that. My wife wasn't my wife when I first met her, and she said, if you're going to marry me, you better find a job that makes some money, and that sort of drove me to get into the business in the first place anyway.
Well, that drove you away from the theater, right?
Yeah, it did. I was in public relations and working for a theater in Louisville, just, living the dream, just going out, having a grand time and all that. And she kind of brought me to my knees in many ways, and started this career that's now lasted over 50 years. It's amazing. It
is absolutely incredible. I'm sure Zeke has another follow-up, but can I go back to something that we talked about 20 minutes ago? That single-story warehouse, you guys don't have to rotate the barrels like you would in those multi-level ricks. You can kind of leave them you don't have to worry about rotating those through those 6 levels, do you?
No, we don't. We don't rotate them. We might have to move them to get to a barrel we want because of the age on it or because of code that we need. But we'll usually put them right back where they were.
I bet you could kind of save on overhead because those other places are moving one from the 6th floor down to the 1st floor and the 2nd floor up to the 5th floor. And like you talked about, those higher floors are a lot hotter. It's got to make for a more continuous ecosystem.
Right, exactly.
That was one that, admittedly, we went out to a bunch of people and like we normally do and our friends, and we say, hey guys, we're going to have Al Young on. What are some questions that you have opposed to the questions that we have? And that, I'll tell you, most questions we got were, when is there going to be another Al Young release? Which we had that one too. The other one was on the single story rickhouses. One was on your favorite recipe, but you already kind of said you're not going to mention that because everybody will go get it. I think...
Well, that is kind of being pompous, isn't it?
Well, it's
kind of being like somebody would believe what I say, but you'd be surprised.
It's the truth. It's the truth. We'd see values on a certain market go way up once we heard Al Young's favorite is OBSQ. I think Dan Gardner always has a good answer on that. He goes, well, this week it's this, and last week it was something else.
It's well said. Dan is a master at it. He knows exactly what he's talking about.
And then another question we got, sorry if we're kind of going random here. We promise if you're listening to us, we did outline this out and have some thoughts. But the other big question that we got is, you know, a lot of the stuff you have is high rye. So you have your high rye mash, you have your low rye mash, and there's all sorts of different percentages in there depending on the 10 different recipes. Will you guys ever release a rye? Or is that something that you're good with just the 10 recipes as they are?
You know, one of the things, John and Zeke, that has held us back is the fact that we didn't have the capacity to do something like that. And now with the expansion project that's added another still and doubler, more fermenters and more warehouses, I'm not going to rule out the possibility of doing a higher rye. But I can't tell you when. Because right now we are doing our dead level best just to meet the demand for the product that we have now for all 50 states that we're in and in Europe and in Japan.
And Japan actually gives you guys the bulk of your business, right? A lot of the stuff goes out there. Is that because of the Kirin influence, or was that going before?
Well, actually, it does play a big part in it. It does. When you're out of the market for almost 60 years, I believe is the best way to say it, then you do require a more emphasis on your export markets. And that's what we had going on in Europe and in Japan. And Japan, of course, had a relationship with us through Kirin, who became our distributor back in the 1970s. And they're the ones that made, along with Seagram's, made that brand paramount in Japan and in certain parts of Europe as well.
That super premium, you see people post pictures of it. It just makes it sound better, right? Four Roses super premium.
Well, you know, you got to have a little punch. You got to have a little hype.
It always helps. If nothing else, John and I were fortunate enough in an event a few months back to have some 4-year Four Roses.
No, it was a 2-year.
Was it?
Yeah, it
was young, but had amazing flavor. We laughed at how solid that was as far as a private sampling, so to speak. One question that we also had, or at least I did as well, from what I could gather from the lineage here, is the original yeast that was bought from Seagram's still being used, or has that changed?
The yeast cultures that we use now are the ones that came out of the Seagram library and had been involved with Four Roses when they owned it. So we have proprietary relationship and ownership of those yeasts. So they are the ones that Seagram started back in the 40s, and they're still pure and still alive and well. One thing about it, if somebody said they had the original Four Roses, it would have been made by the Paul Jones Company, and those yeast and so forth weren't desirable for Seagram, so they changed the composition when they bought it in 1943.
You hear stories about the Russells having backups in their freezer at home. Did they give you an emergency yeast that you have to keep in the freezer in case something happens?
We keep our yeast in the White Laboratory in California.
Oh, there you go.
And every month we get fresh samples to continue growing our yeast at the distillery and making our product. So we've got it. We've got it covered.
Good to hear. Should anything happen, which just for perspective, as someone that's been in the business for forever, a neighbor down the road had a fire some years ago, and there's speculation that the yeast may have been lost, and that's what changes the flavor profile that some people remember. How much, I guess, faith would you put in that, or what's your perspective there?
I think that, anybody that has any sense at all probably has a reserve backup yeast somewhere. And to think that it changes and alters the flavor is just like somebody saying that, well, it was 6 weeks of bad weather and that changed or altered the flavor. It's perception, public's perception of things not being like they used to be, or things are not going according to the plan. That's one reason why we did the expansion in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, was because of the limestone filtered water in the Salt River, and the microbacterial count in the distillery was favorable for making the whiskey that we make, and for that reason we didn't want to change anything.
And that's a fair point. Kind of going back to things we talked about, you do talk a little bit about picking barrels and people that have come in for private selections. And I think one of the things that has probably changed with Four Roses and really built it up as things have moved forward are the private selections, getting one of the 10 recipes, having a store pick, having a private group pick. First off, how much do you think that has actually benefited you all? The second part of that is, how much fun do you have on those? And then the third part is, what do you really drive? I mean, we tell you, we do a lot of blind tastings. Is that what you drive a lot of people to in those picks, or do people know what they're picking when they do it? How would you sit somebody down and have them select a barrel? So I know, again, it's a triple barrel question, but I know you can handle it.
First of all, we usually arrange the barrels so that the information on the barrel head is not available to those who are in there making the pick. We turn the barrels around so that they don't have a chance to be prejudiced by what the code might be, the production date, or anything like that. We don't necessarily do that on the 100 proof program, because it's all the same recipe, the OBSV recipe, similar to our regular single barrel. But the biggest thing about the whole thing is there are no cast-off barrels in the private barrel selection. They're all first-rate barrels that were chosen by Brent to be in the program to support this infatuation with private barrel selections by retailers as well as groups that help to get the Four Roses name out there. I know we're doing our best to keep the program going, and it's not always easy to do because of the availability of the codes and waiting for things to come of age. So it's done a lot to drive the business. It really has. And the buzz all over social media and everything has created a culture that's saying, have you got the OBSQ or the OBSV from such and such liquor retailer? And it drives that secondary market, and it just creates a buzz, and that in turn drives the local retailer. It's been a very profitable thing for us in many ways, not only from the sale of the barrel, but also from the buzz that goes out across the country. There's so many whiskey nerds out there; it's unbelievable.
Oh no, it's definitely there. I've had in Austin the past 3 months at least 2 or 3 picks that went out that somebody somewhere messaged me just saying, "Hey, aren't you in Nashville? Well, I saw something somewhere that this store had this pick. Can you get me one?"
Yes, yes.
And honestly, luckily, I've been able to oblige the majority of the time. But
well, some of the ones here sell out. I think two of the stores that we love here are Carruthers and Elixir, and the last Carruthers pick, I think, sold out in 12 hours, and the last Elixir pick, it was a short barrel, but I don't even think he had it in the store. I think enough people claimed it before he even got it.
Yeah, by the time this runs, we won't be committing any fouls, but it was strictly basically an allocated, if I know you, I'll offer this to you. If not, it's not going on the shelf.
That's how crazy Four Roses has become. I think in one way you have to smile, and as we're telling you this, you're probably like, that's good. It's good for the brand that it's coveted. And then in another way, you're probably thinking, hot damn, we got to get more barrels for that.
It is a two-edged sword, that's for sure.
Are those fun for you? Do you really enjoy?
Yes, they are. They are fun because no matter how many you do in a week's time or whatever, the people are engaging. The people are sincere in wanting to try to get the barrel that they think will do the best for their store. I always ask them, what are you looking for? What do you think you want to have that will be suitable for the people that are buying a variety of products? In other words, what are they into? Are they buying stuff other than Four Roses? And if they are, what are they? And then you can kind of wonder if that's what's driving their palate.
Yeah, and we always love the social media pictures after the fact when you happen to show up and everybody goes, look who was at my pick today, and then it's all up everywhere.
Oh, well, it's I don't know what to say about that. That's something that I've never really fostered or pushed about being at a selection. It's nice when it happens, and if it makes people feel good, well and good. All right.
And as we said, we or at least I guess I can't speak for John, but I've yet to have a single barrel that I wasn't a fan of.
No, you can speak for me.
But with that, are some of the mashes, which I guess obviously may or may not be in a single barrel, but is the intention for some of those to be used in blends? And when you get a cherry one, it's really good. But for the most part, are any of the mashes, like I say, just normally meant to be intended for blending versus enjoyed on their own?
Well, when you take your maturation studies and you're looking at whiskeys for this and that and the other, we don't ever make whiskey for a specific brand or a specific expression of Four Roses. We just look at them and chart their progress and kind of get an idea where we might want to use them. And then when that aging takes place, we'll decide, well, this one probably would be better to be in the 80 proof, or this is a special OBSV to go into single barrel, or maybe we should hold this one out to be in a limited edition, or the K and the O that's going into the small batch requires that we use these barrels here that fit that profile. It's a question of fitting profiles rather than, trying to be demanding about any of the whiskeys. We let them do their own thing.
Now, one thing we've heard, and we know you can set the record straight, we've heard about this mythical OBSB and OESE.
Some of those happen to be codes for water mash that are put up at the very beginning of a run in the distilling season. And that means that they're using maybe something to get us started before our yeast comes online and so forth until we get up to speed. So some of those will be out there and they'll be aging in the warehouse, and they'll end up probably being in blends more than anything else.
That makes sense. One thing, I know we've had you on for a long time. We know it's late for you, so we're not going to keep you on all night.
It is, because I got to get up in the morning and I got to go to work.
I know, so we won't keep you on too much longer, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you. You are such a great storyteller. What's one of your favorite stories? And I know it's tough out of 50 years, but we didn't touch on the history enough. So what's one of your favorite stories from your time at Four Roses?
Oh, wow. Gee whiz, I think probably Probably one of them had to do with Charlie Beam, who was the master distiller before O'Bahaney and Jim Rutledge came along. He was sort of like the Kentucky area administrator for Seagram's, and he was a short in stature guy that smoked Lucky Strikes. And when I first went out there, I thought, I'm going to be just like Charlie. So I started smoking Lucky Strikes and tried to emulate what he would do and learn as much as I could out of how to run the distillery out there. And then we all got separated, and he retired, and I went to Indiana to work and came back and saw him one time, and as a result of smoking the Lucky Strikes, he was on oxygen. He looked up at me and he said, "Are you happy you came back?" And I said, "Yeah, I sure am." And then a little while later, he passed on, and I'd lost contact with him. And then one of his relatives came out and said, "You know, how well did you know Charlie?" And I said, "Well, I thought I knew him pretty good." But he said, "Well, we didn't realize it till we started writing his obituary, but during World War II, Charlie was a tail gunner in the bombers that flew over Germany. And they said when he figured out that if he could ride as many of them as he could go home quicker. So he would get off one plane and get on another without taking much of a rest in between, and go out and continue the bombing runs so that he could get back to Kentucky. And he was a quiet man. He was a very, very together person, but he didn't say a whole lot or never showed any sense of anger. But if he saw something he didn't like, he would go back to his office and usually kick a file cabinet or something really wild. But he was one of the guiding forces in making sure that the quality was there, and that trickled down through everybody that he ever worked with. And it's something we still do today.
And that's probably unique, that the fact that you started off working in the quality lab probably has been something that stuck with you for these 50 years, and really ensuring that quality is there. That has to be something that's close to your heart.
It is.
Now, speaking of which, we know the quality is there at Four Roses. We've talked about all the things that we do like about it. You know, one thing I would be remiss in asking before we let you go is, you've got to see this industry change a lot in 50 years. You've been able to see kind of the tough years, not just at Four Roses, but at everywhere. You've been able to see this resurgence back, and now you've probably seen things go to the extreme, to the fact that there are podcasts and radio shows that you are on right now in talking about bourbon, and that's probably something that was unheard of before. Where do you see this industry going in the next few years?
Well, you know, I've had that question asked before, but I don't really have a pat answer for it. But I would say, look at all of the expansion that's going on in the bourbon industry. Look at all of the labels that have materialized. Look at all of the emphasis that's being put on the bourbon trail in Kentucky. And look at all of the interest that's being generated across the country in this particular brand of beverage alcohol, being bourbon, no matter what the brand name is. And to answer your question, I don't think that we've seen the end of it yet. I mean, everything has a cycle. I'm fully aware of that. And we've been through some good times and some bad times in 50 years. But as far as some people call it the bourbon renaissance is concerned, I think the fact that the people are putting money into it to build more distilleries and build more stills and production facilities and warehouses indicates that the thing's going to be around for quite a while.
Yeah, I would agree. Zeke, what do you have?
So a couple of somewhat quick questions. I have all 10 mashes in the single barrel. They're all from 2007 distillate, which is when I graduated from college. We had our 10-year reunion this past fall. I'd hoped to have everyone blend their own take-home bottle, but that didn't pan out due to time restraints. I'm now faced with doing these blends on my own. Any tips or advice to me or anyone else that's looking to take some Four Roses single barrel expressions and do their own novel blending?
Well, start out with a goal. Find out what you try to make, what you want to attain in the way of a mingled product. and then keep notes of your percentages as you go along and find out what worked and what doesn't work. And then never give up in terms of trying to find that perfect combination so you can make a drinkable mingling, if you will. I don't think that you have to start with a baseline somewhere. So try to find the one you like the best and build off of it. That's what we do all the time.
I've heard you have to use a blender. Is that any truth to that? Do you guys whip it together in high-speed blending?
You can, or you can just shake it up and down a few times in a carboy or in a cylinder, and see how it comes out.
That's more Zeke style.
I can speak to that. One other thing I had, and again, kind of going back to the book, I didn't want to seem unappreciative and seem like I didn't pay attention there. But at some point, I did see a fabled eggnog recipe mentioned. And if it's published on the website, I apologize. I didn't have a chance to search it out, but I wondered if that was still available. I haven't.
It's available on the website. It also is available in old magazine ads going back to the 1930s. It was a very popular ad that ran. In fact, that same punch bowl and cups that's in the picture in the book was used repeatedly for different expressions of the eggnog ad. But what changed was the composition of the whiskey, because it went through all of the different proofs, all of the different blends. Everything that Four Roses went through was caught up in that eggnog recipe as it morphed over time. So you can start with your eggs, you can start with your cream, you can start with, you can even add the rum that's called for in some of those recipes. But right now I think you can make a very tasty eggnog, even out of bought eggnog without alcohol, and using small batch or if you're really capricious, single barrel, or if you have a budget in mind, you can put the 80 proof in there.
So which one do you go with for your family and friends?
I would do the small batch.
It's like his Manhattan. He already told you the small batch is good in cocktails.
Hey, I just wanted to clarify. You know, there's the one answer, and there's the one that you serve your close knit circle.
I like that. Yeah.
Mr. Al Young, thank you so much for taking the time. We have really, really, really appreciated it. It's not every day that we have an opportunity to talk to someone like you, so we would be remiss if we did not close in saying thank you for everything that you have done for Four Roses. But not only that, thank you for everything that you have done for the industry. You are one of those people that continue to make it great, and we will be continuing to look and see what Four Roses comes out with. Because, and man, I'm going to extend this for a second. It's the 130th year. So what else is coming out this year? Is there something that we should expect? And then we'll say bye to you.
You know, what you should do, and I encourage everybody to do it, is to visit our website. Keep tuned for special events to celebrate the 130th. Keep an eye out for press releases about special whiskeys that will be involved. This is an always evolving thing. It's going to be a topper. It's going to be unique. That's all I can tell you.
Well, we hope to see you there and in person and catch up. So thank you very much, Zeke. You should probably say bye to him too.
Yeah, just reiterate what John said. Thank you very much. If any empty hands are available on that selection process, we'll make a short trip, and any single barrel picks we can get our noses into, we'll certainly hopefully look forward to seeing you there as well.
We make a good focus group. But
all right, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it. I hope we haven't muddied the water.
No, never. Have a great night.
Just made it tastier.
Thank you. You too.
Wow, Zeke, that certainly was an experience, having Al Young on the phone. Kind of crazy, right?
No, it had been in our books for a bit, and we had to reschedule and do some other things. But honestly, just more than happy to get that knocked out, to hear perspective, thoughts, etc. And We tried to dive into as many questions as we thought were pertinent. We probably didn't pay enough attention to history and background. They were kind enough to send us the Four Roses.
Al Young wrote the history of Four Roses. So this is the return of a whiskey legend. It is the whole history of Four Roses. Al Young, as brand ambassador, is actually the official historian for the brand. But it has a sticker on it that matches the same thing that's on the bottle of Al Young.
Either way, to anyone out there, this is a really neat read. Really explains everything and the diversity and how tumultuous the whiskey industry was over years, as far as before and after Prohibition. It being liked or disliked, especially among the American public. And the perception that, the owners of the brand over time, as they changed, may have had and what they tried to do to just keep a product, selling, and what they did with the juice. It's beyond 360 degrees to me.
Agreed. It's like fifth dimension. Four Roses was nice enough to send us some of their whiskey, but by no means is this a paid advertisement for them. But go find them on your shelf, because they put out some really good stuff and we recognize quality. But you can find us on Instagram at Dad's Drinking Bourbon, on Facebook at Dad's Drinking Bourbon. Find us on Twitter at Bourbon Dads. Find us on your favorite podcast provider, Apple, Google Play, Stitcher, Podknife. Where else can the people find us, Zeke?
Nashville, Tennessee.
Correct.
It's the one answer I always get right.
That is correct. But anyways, thank you very much for listening. We hope you've liked this episode as much as we have. Cheers.
And hey, it's been a while since we've had some guests stop in. If you're going to be in town or nearby, let us know. There's nothing we enjoy more than setting up some blinds and having a good time with people.
Agreed.
Night. Ciao.